What is going on, Hive Warriors? So in this video, we're going to talk about 5 big mistakes that people make when prolonged fasting. One question that I've been getting a lot since recently, since I put out the video on the study that went as far as 60 hours is, well, is this something that I should do? Should I apply a 60-hour fast to my regimen? So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. Now, the first thing I do want to touch on in regards to the study that just dropped, that I talked about, that dropped in October, is that the study is not telling you to fast for 60 hours. The study is reading what's happening in a 60-hour period. So the fat burning or the fat oxidation in comparison to the calorie restriction only group started immediately. Within a few hours of being in a fast, you started to see the separation, but they tracked it all the way until 60 hours. The study's not telling you to fast for 60 hours. So just keep that in mind. It's just tracking 60 hours of fasting. And you could already see the fat oxidation separation early on in the fast. I think you start to see dramatic separation by like the 8th hour, right? By the 8th hour between the two. So just keep that in mind. But still, I understand people want to use prolonged fasting. So we're going to talk about the mistakes that people make when they use prolonged fasting. All right, so let's go with mistake number 5, refeeding. People do not think about this nearly enough. Nearly as much as they should be thinking about this. They just refeed. And usually it's with the most palatable, the most exciting type of food that people can eat. When in reality, you should actually sit back and think about the food that you're about to eat after a prolonged fasting period, because it's important. There's certain things that can happen, even just with your stomach health, right? The stomach lining. The lining of your stomach is going to be irritated if you bring in these heavy foods to start breaking down early or initially, right? You should probably get more watery kind of foods that carry certain calories in it, or that carry calories, so that you can start the process, so that lining kind of dissipates with the bile and all that stuff as you're breaking down the food, and then you could be a little bit more aggressive with the food on how solid the food is moving forward. But also, your insulin is on a springboard, and the longer you fast, the more pulled back that springboard is, or the more tension there is on that springboard. And what does that mean? Well, if you eat, for example, every 3 hours, your insulin is going to shoot up, but it's not going to shoot up as high every initial, consumption. But if you don't eat for a long period of time, the longer you don't eat, the more tension there is on that springboard. So if you don't eat for 60 hours and then you finally eat, and it's stuff that's high on the glycemic index, is going to shoot your insulin up really high, and insulin shoots up really quickly, and it takes a longer time to come back down. So it might take you a longer time to get into a post-absorptive range, a fasted state where you're actually oxidizing fat. So you don't want it to shoot so high up and then come so slowly down, and because you put it on a springboard, it shot really high in comparison to what it normally would have done before. So how do you combat this? Well, you ensure that the foods that you start to break your fast with, that's gonna initiate that launch of your insulin, is low in the glycemic index. So you want to make sure, and you want it to be something that has sugar in it, right? Something like fructose, right? Like fruit, for example, an apple is a perfect example. It's low in the glycemic index, but when you consume it, it does shoot your insulin up, which is what you want to do. But it shoots it up. It's like a controlled insulin jump, as opposed to getting something that's high in the glycemic index and then your insulin shooting super high. And now once you did that low jump, it's no longer in that springboard. You release the tension so you can actually go on to continue eating the things that you want to eat. So that's how you kind of circumvent that. Now let's look at number 4, not exercising. This is one that a lot of people it just goes over their heads. But really, you want to make sure you're exercising, because one of the things that are consistent when we look at studies with intermittent fasting and even prolonged fasting, especially in prolonged fasting, is muscle breakdown, muscle loss. Lean mass loss is always greater in the prolonged fasting group or the fasting group or the intermittent fasting group in comparison to the caloric restriction only group. Why is that the case? One, you're removing one of the pillars of protein synthesis. There's 4 pillars of protein synthesis. You have to be at a caloric surplus, which is not something you want to do because you're losing weight. So that's already taken off. You also want to eat a good amount of protein. That's something that could be controlled. 0.7 grams of protein per lean pound of lean body mass. So basically not your overall weight. Let's say you weigh 200 pounds, but 200 pounds consists of like a certain percentage of body fat, and really 170 pounds is how much you weigh in terms of your lean mass without body fat. Then it'll be a pound per each pound of 170 and 0.7 grams with that. So 0.7 grams for each pound of 170 pounds. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, you want to make sure you have adequate protein intake, right? That's another pillar. That one is possible when doing fasting or when doing intermittent fasting. But it's not necessarily possible when you're doing prolonged fasting because you're not consuming anything at all. So you're killing that protein, the pillar, right? And then another pillar is basically exercise. Exercise is a pillar, and that's a pillar that even if you are fasting, you can still tackle. You can still actually, have happen even though you're fasting. So you want to make sure that, because there's other pillars that you just automatically cannot do no matter what. Oh, and the 4th pillar, just in case, is meal frequency, which means eating protein frequently, which means consistently eating, which means not fasting at all. So that one is completely dead. So 1, 2, and 4 dead. Exercise is the only saving grace. It's the only one that you have. So please do it, because what happens is the majority of the calories that will be getting lost, or not the majority, but a big chunk of it, will come from your muscle, because your body is going to see that, one, the muscle is not being fed, it's not being used because you're not doing exercise. It's not as important. And your body, even though people will try to make you believe, oh no, your body is smart, it sees body fat as automatic fuel, so it'll protect your muscles and use body fat. It's much more complex than that. Your body also wants to store fat just in case if something happens in the future. Your body then starts to determine what's the most important thing right now. Do we just keep tapping into this body fat that they have stored, or do we focus on something that maybe is not being used, something that's maybe not as important right now? Because what if he gets stuck on an island in the future? We need to have a good amount of body fat. So let's go ahead and tap into this muscle that's not really being fed. There's not really protein coming in, so the muscle's not being fed. He's not working out. The muscle's not being used. There's no point for it, and it exists, and it has calories in it if we break it down and turn it into glucose by the process called glucose neogenesis. So let's go ahead and use this muscle. Your body is not this A and B kind of thing, black and white. Oh, body fat, energy, don't need muscle. It doesn't work like that. There's so much more going on in the body. The body's doing a lot of things to constantly try to keep you alive. Your body will do irrational stuff to try to keep you alive just that much more, right? Even though you think it's why would they do that? If you had 0% body fat, you would start to have organ shrinkage because your body will start to eat your organs. That sounds counterintuitive, but it's trying to give you more time to survive. That's the thing. Your body does complex biological things to kind of give you to be in the best, most optimal space possible. It's not the most optimal thing to just take all your fat when there's muscle that's not being used. So exercise to mitigate as much muscle loss as possible when doing prolonged fasting. Let's go ahead and move on to number 3. Not understanding the peaks and the fall off of prolonged fasting. One thing that I always recommend, and this is based off of the multiple studies that we've seen over the years, and I've been reading studies since 2010 when it comes to intermittent fasting. You don't want to really, in my opinion, pass 48 hours of fasting, because it's not to be like, oh, let's go against the prolonged fasting stuff. That's not the point. It's based off of the studies that we've seen. And even the study that we talked about, the recent one, the very powerful metabolic chamber study, after 50 hours, they already saw a complete drop off in terms of you were getting diminishing returns. It wasn't worth it anymore. You weren't that far off in terms of fat oxidation in comparison to the calorie restriction group. Now, that could be that the body just said, hey, look, this is when we're going to completely start doing a switch over and start burning muscle more aggressively as opposed to just in spots. We don't know for sure, but it's definitely a falling off period, a diminishing returns period around the 48-hour, 50-hour mark. So to keep it on the safe side, just don't go above 48 hours. We've seen diminishing returns in every single study after 48 hours. So there's no point to go further than that. But if you do want to go further than that, then understand that at this point, you are not getting the most out of fat loss. You might want to just do a reset yourself mentally, whatever, physically, but you're definitely at least understand that going 4 days without eating is not increasing the body fat loss any more than if you were to do little spurts of prolonged fasting separated in between the two, as opposed to just going straight through a 4-day fast, if that makes sense. All right, let's go ahead and move on to number 2. Using it consistently. Now, I do understand that people want to do prolonged fasting because they feel that it helps them. They feel that it's something that it's a way to it's a way to reset their system, reset their cravings. And sure, it is a way to reset your cravings, right? Because when you do these things, you become your appetite drops, you become less hungry, right? You kind of force your body into a space where it's like, oh, you know what? I'm not craving all of this high palatable foods, right? Because you've kind of disengaged yourself from it for a good period of time. And then it allows you to maybe kind of flow back in and eat less. But sometimes people do that, flow back in, eat less for a short period of time, eat the thing that they want, overeat, get to a point where they feel uncomfortable, and then they go back to prolonged fasting. All you're doing is a vicious cycle that will never end. If you keep on doing that, that vicious cycle will never end. So you want to ensure that you're not using it as a crutch, that you're not consistently just doing prolonged fasting because it's gonna help me lose the weight I just gained. Or no, I just gained weight again. Now it's gonna help me lose the weight I just gained. So because you're seeing dramatic weight loss, obviously, when you do prolonged fasting, and you're feeling like that's the only way you could get back control of the weight is if you do prolonged fasting. But in reality, it's just going to put you in a vicious circle. It's not really going to help you. It's going to create a lot of muscle loss, and over time, the reduction in muscle loss is actually going to make it harder for you because your metabolism is not going to be working with you. It's going to be definitively working against you because lean mass is the primary driver for your metabolic rate. So you want to have as much muscle on your body as possible, which is why I always say Exercise is super important. Even if you don't do prolonged fasting, exercise is super important. The more muscle you have on your body, the better it will be for you in terms of managing your weight loss and keeping the weight off, because your metabolism will go down as your weight goes down. You want something to combat that metabolism reduction that pushes up against that and increases your metabolism simply from having muscle and not having more weight from body fat. It's a really smart thing that helps you with weight management and calorie control. Now let's go to number one, which is, I think number two bounces off perfectly into number one. Thinking that prolonged fasting will solve your weight loss problems. It won't. It will give you a small dopamine hit, a very short dopamine hit of seeing something reciprocate your efforts on the scale. Oh, look, I did this. Boom. Look at that, right? I could see this number. It's clear as day. I've lost all this weight. This was a success. But the problem is that that's not sustainable. You need nutrition. You need food. You need consistent protein intake. Protein is super important. Turns into amino acids. It does so many things. Heals your skin. Provides fuel for your muscles. It is like the do-all, be-all kind of macronutrient. You need that. You need that bad boy. So that comes with eating consistently on a daily basis. There's a balance between fasting and providing your body with nutrition. Just prolong fasting constantly because you're just trying to force that scale to go down, it's not going to be beneficial for you. And the more prolonged fasting you do, the more you're going to be eating at your muscle tissue, because you're going to have moments of glucose neogenesis. Remember, your brain, don't know if you guys know this, but your brain could only work off of 70% of ketone fuel. Your brain prefers glucose. It because your body's so dynamic, it's so versatile, it's so resilient, it will use ketones for a certain amount of time and be like, okay, I'll use this ketone for now, but I only could use ketones for 70% of my energy. The brain, I'm for the other percentage, I'm gonna need glucose. So if you don't give it to me via food, I'm gonna find it somewhere else, and I'm gonna take a tissue that's not glucose and turn it into glucose, which is glucose neogenesis, and a lot of that tissue that they're going to take is going to be muscle tissue. So it's not, prolonged fasting is not going to be the thing that helps you with your weight loss. If you're constantly defaulting to it consistently, that means that something is wrong and you're not going to have anything sustained because you're constantly going back to it. So that means you're either gaining weight or staying the same or what have you, but you're consistently going back to it. You're using it as a crutch, basically. You want to make sure that you find a program where you could do fasting, intraday fasting, which is the best because you get the most out of it. There's not the diminishing returns. Plus you get the nutrition fuel all the time. You get the protein coming in, which helps with protein synthesis. You're getting all those different things. And you're still getting the benefits of fasting. Don't let anybody tell you that there's no benefits to fasting 16 hours or 20 hours. That's just too short of a time. We've seen it in the studies. You automatically start getting the benefits. After not eating for around 8 hours, you start to already see a major distance between just caloric restriction and those who are doing intermittent fasting. So those are the top 5 biggest mistakes when doing prolonged fasting. Hopefully this video has helped you guys or given you some insight as to how to look at protein fasting moving forward. I do understand that there are protein fasting aficionados that are going to say, no, the muscle doesn't, why would your body use muscle when really it has body fat to use? But that's because you're looking at it in a completely simplistic way where it's like, oh, that's a obvious, but that's not how your body actually works when we look at the biology and the mechanistic reactions to fasting and intermittent fasting and prolonged fasting. We've seen in the studies that no, it'll still burn muscle. if you don't take care of the muscle and if you're consistently doing these prolonged fasting regimens. All right, until the next one, guys, this is Edward from Fledge Fitness. Peace out.